Hi everyone, my name is Amna Liaqat and I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Toronto. Today I'll be talking about participatory design for intergenerational culture exchange in immigrant families, how collaborative narration and creation fosters democratic engagement. This research was done in collaboration with Benett Axtell and Cosmin Munteanu from the University of Toronto. Storytelling is a key activity through which we foster family connection. It is a tool through which we pass on language, social, and cultural knowledge. Very often in families, grandparents are the curators of family history and of cultural knowledge. And typically, this kind of sharing is done around existing physical artifacts like photo albums or photos. Without this starting point of physical artifacts, it can be a challenge for grandparents and grandchildren to engage in storytelling. This is especially true for the millions of immigrants in Canada. In Canada, there are 1.7 million immigrants over the age of 65, and many of them live in multi-generational homes. Migration threatens the storytelling tradition for two major reasons. One is that families very often leave behind their physical photos when they migrate, and secondly, the growing language and culture divides between immigrant grandparents and their young grandchildren. So what can we do in the absence of physical artifacts? How can we support this storytelling process? This motivation guides our research question. We asked the question, how do immigrant grandparents and grandchildren engage in storytelling and culture exchange as co-conversationalists and co-creators despite culture and language differences? And so we focus specifically on drawing as an activity that can promote this cultural exchange. There were a few methodological considerations that we took in the design of our study. Firstly, we employed participatory design workshops with 10 families of diverse heritage across Canada. We worked closely with grandparents and grandchildren to ensure their voices and participation in the process were directly reflected in our design implications. To that end, we made extensive use of poster boards, index cards, sticky notes, markers, scissors, tape, to give families the creative flexibility to design solutions that worked for them. We also adopted a magic thing approach, which is a co-design technique. And our intent with this was to encourage ideas that are not limited by perceived rules or existing abilities of technology. The way we implemented this in our study is that we asked families, especially the children, to imagine the poster board they were working on was a magical board that can do whatever you want it to do to encourage that creative ideation. We adopted a trialogical approach in our analysis. And so what that means is that by introducing physical artifacts into what was otherwise a conversational process, we created a shared or a third space. We applied this trialogical lens to our analysis to investigate what the collaboration being done on this shared space and this act of creation reveals about family dynamics and collaborative processes. Putting all of this together, we engaged grandparents and grandchildren in a participatory process through a scaffolded model that consisted of two major steps. So first, families created hints for individual stories that they had. Secondly, they put all of these hints together into a large collaborative design and organized this into what we called the memory board. Here are some visual examples of what that looked like. So step one, hint designs, family wrote down hints to remind them of their stories onto index cards. In step two, they then put all of this together on a large poster board. They created an organization for it, a structure, and they also added their magic thing designs onto this large poster board. So we performed a thematic analysis and came up with 5 themes from which we suggested 3 design implications. For this presentation, I'll be focusing on our first finding and design implication, which concerns the trialogic process. We found that by introducing the shared space prompted consistent, collaborative, two-way interactions, as well as the creation of a joint storytelling process. So what this means is that by introducing a shared space, it helped grandparents and grandchildren equalize their storytelling voices. This was primarily due to the fact that now grandchildren could also take on an active role in storytelling by being the designers and the artists for their grandparents' stories. This also served as a catalyst for positive intergenerational interaction. And finally, we found that by giving families flexibility over roles and the activities they were engaging in, families took ownership of the design process and personalized it in a way that was meaningful to them. I'll share a few visual examples of what this looked like. We found that a shared space promotes a diversity of collaboration types. On the left-hand side, you see the grandparent pointing and directing as the grandchild creates or draws. In the middle image, you see the grandparent and grandchild actually step back from drawing and creation for a moment to talk with each other about their next steps. Finally, on the photo on the right-hand side, you see the grandparent actually being the one creating and drawing on the shared space to show the grandchild something while the grandchild observes. We found a shared space encourages grandparents to share cultural knowledge. In the picture on the left-hand side, you see the grandparent drawing a picture of a tree to explain to the grandchild what a specific tree in their home country looked like. On the right-hand side, you see examples of all the different kinds of cultural clues that grandparents either directed their grandchild to draw or drew it themselves. So you have a flag of the heritage country, you have special kinds of cooking utensils that were used, or you have the special kinds of blackboards that were used in village classrooms. We also found that grandparents and grandchildren switched quite often between leadership and supporting roles depending on what was needed at the moment. So over here we have some quotes from one of the families where the grandchild was taking on a leadership approach. The grandchild asked or suggested, "We can put this here because we are having celebrations with family together." And then they asked the grandparent for feedback saying like this or like that. The grandparent, in a supportive role, responds with, "This also looks okay." And the grandchild then responds and builds on the grandparent's answer by saying, "I like it like that. It looks like a caption." And so these kinds of exchanges we observed quite frequently in our families, and this is often prompted by the need to collaborate over a shared space. Finally, we saw that families personalize the process quite often. You see in this example here, one of the grandchildren turns the hinting activity into a game by placing the hints face down and asking the grandparent to select one card randomly. And we saw examples of this kind of gamification or personalization in many of the families. From all of these findings, we make some suggestions and design implications for cultural exchange. We find that we should be designing shared spaces to be springboards for collaboration, as very often even an introductory activity like the hinting can be a springboard for collaboration. We should also be designing for the active participation and flexible roles of both grandparents and grandchildren, as this is something they switch between quite often, so we should not be predefining the roles that family members can take in the storytelling process. Finally, we should also be designing for a meta-commentary like value expression as both significant motivation for and output from storytelling. And so very often grandparents added additional layers of information onto their stories, and preserving this as meta-commentary is significant for the grandparents. So moving forward, engaging over story creation and telling creates a trialogic process across generations, leading to continuing cycles of storytelling and value sharing. And though immigration introduces social barriers, or what we consider to be social barriers like language and culture, these are not necessarily barriers to storytelling and cultural exchange, because very often it's these gaps that were prompting discussions and collaboration. So thank you for your attention, and we would especially like to extend a thank you to all the families across Canada that shared their homes and their stories with us.